All forces in the field. We have sightings of Red Legion infiltrate.
Hey everybody, Rev Shadow 508 here. I'm here today giving you a breakdown of my Solar Celestial Nighthawk Hunter build for Season 23. One of the key components of this build is doing high-level endgame content, such as Master Lost Sectors, Nightfalls, and dungeons and all that stuff, and with relative ease being able to deal with champions or major enemies really without struggling, as well as being able to contribute a good amount of power to your group. So without further ado, let's get started. The core of this build, obviously, Celestial Nighthawk, which the revamped Celestial Nighthawk has really juiced this thing up to be just extremely powerful. It's a tool you can use to get rid of an annoying champion in your way that's giving you some trouble if it's just you get caught in a bad scenario. You can also use this to chunk away bosses' health on higher level difficulty, if not one-shot the bosses outright on lower level difficulty. One of the core things I searched for in this build, one of the main things I looked for is I don't really like piercing sidearms. I don't like anti-barrier sidearms. I'm not a huge fan of sidearms. So what I looked to do was basically try and use different weapons as my anti-barrier weapons. So what I have come to is basically relying on Radiant, which you can do that season through this current season's artifact, which is Flint Striker is the biggest component about this, which is Rapid Solar Weapon Precision Hits and Rapid Solar Weapon Final Blows grant Radiant. And this pairs really well with several of the other things in the artifact, which we'll go over a bit more in a bit, but this is a core component of this build. The other component that which is, again, you're up to sort of, you have some choice here. You have some leeway. I use this Astyanax 4 here. This has Archer's Tempo and Incandescence, so whenever I land a precision hit, it decreases my draw time. And then I've got Incandescence, just so when I kill the targets, causes a nice little solar explosion, scorching all nearby targets. When you strike 2 precision hits with a bow, that procs Flint Striker here, which will make the bow radiant. And so, as you can see, if you look at my traits here, I do not have Unstoppable Bows selected. So if you don't have this selection, you'll get the armor piercing on the bow, and then you can, use the bow to deal with barrier champions, which is my primary usage for this, as well as it's just my primary weapon I use for dealing with most enemies. It is a precision frame, so if you land a precision hit while they have their barrier up, like you land their critical hit, this will one-tap their barrier. It will take their barrier away immediately. But you have to land a precision hit, otherwise it's going to do a good amount, but it's not going to one-shot it. To give you some other options for your solar weapon, hand cannons are another really good option. I've got the Apochal integration here, which is an adaptive frame. This also comes with nanotech tracing rockets, which is really good. Gets incandescent stats for all, which is a fantastic combination. I believe this is 3 hits with a hand cannon. 3 precision hits with a hand cannon will get you Radiant. So Trust is another option because it's a precision frame, so this is going to be nice and stable, and it's going to have pretty predictable kick. So this is another great option. It's pretty accessible. You get these through Gambit, and you can focus them as well for a pretty reasonable cost. Again, other options, we have the BXR 55 Battler. This gets Radiant also pretty quick. I believe it's like 2 bursts worth of bullets will get you Radiant, roughly. This is a craftable weapon once you get the pattern from Dares of Eternity. You can go Incandescence. I go Perpetual Motion here right now. Demolitionist is also fantastic for letting you get your grenades back quicker, but we will get to the abilities portion shortly. If you really like auto rifles, you can use Amet. But the problem with Amet is you need a lot more hits to be able to get yourself Radiant with an auto rifle. So you will need to use other methods, like, for example, a Fragment, to get yourself Radiant. So it is an option, but it is not one that I generally find myself using. I generally stick to the Battler when I want to use like an automatic sort of weapon, and there's a lot going on and it's harder for me to use the bow. That's generally my fallback. We're using Dragon's Breath, new exotic rocket launcher for the season. As everyone knows, this thing's nuts. This thing's great. and it gets even better with the catalyst. As you can see, I don't even have the catalyst yet. I just unlocked it, but I haven't finished it. And it's made even better by the artifact perks this season, which is Ardent Ordnance, which is whenever you fire a rocket, you consume 1 stack of armor charge, granting you increased damage and reload speed until you reload or stow this rocket launcher again. So if you have armor charges, you basically just make Dragon's Breath do more damage, which, you know, who doesn't want that? Another option is Overload rocket launchers. However, I'm not using this right now, and I'll get into that right now. We have Overload auto rifles and Overload pulse rifles. Overload pulse rifles in particular, I find are just very, very, very good. Whether you're using a rapid fire frame or, you know, a lightweight frame as I've got here, or a high impact frame. They're just very, very solid in general for dealing with Overload champions, and generally you can get stuff like, as you can see, Kinetic Tremors here, which is just exceptional for dealing with Overload champions, because on top of, you know, when you, even if you don't stun them, if you, well, after you stun them, the Kinetic Tremors is going to continue to go off, and it's going to continue to prevent their health from regenerating, because they're still being hit by something that is classified as Overload shot damage. So I've got this Battle Scar here because it's also got Shoot to Loot on, and this thing, I love this thing. This is my primary use one. I got this Psi Hermetic, which I plan to test out at some point. I haven't gotten the chance to here, but I got a pretty good roll. But you know, you guys might see me use this in a Lost Sector in the future. To move on from that, that's why I don't have Overload rocket launchers, and also because if you don't have Overload rocket launchers on, you can use those rocket launchers for anti-barrier champions while they have their barriers up if you have Radiant. Which I can tell you right now does nasty things to anti-barrier champions. It will absolutely obliterate them. And you never have that risk of, say, a Servitor, you know, you stun them, they break out of the stun, you fire your Dragon's Breath, you land it on them, but then the Servitor teleports behind something, puts its barrier back up again. If they're stuck with the Dragon's Breath and they do that, the Dragon's Breath is going to tick off that barrier in seconds. And the ignitions going off will then just, you know, cause anything that's near the barrier servitor to also just kind of die. And they'll get scorched, and, you know, it does good things. It's a very solid weapon to use as an anti-barrier weapon. However, you have to pair it with Radiant, which is why I've got several of these other things here. The other thing is Dragon's Breath can also be used on any other champion to just do a lot of damage when they're stunned. And because my pulse rifles are so effective at stunning, that is why I've opted to not take that trait in particular. We also have Revitalizing Blast, which is when you cause damage with solar ability. It weakens champions or bosses for a short duration. And so we're going to get into the build portion of that now. Well, actually, we'll continue to talk about champions real quick, finish up. I've got the Warden's Law here, which is what I use for my Unstoppable champions. I'm using Unstoppable hand cannons. There's plenty of options for hand cannons, as you can see obviously here. If you want to use like your primary here as well, I wouldn't recommend this. You can use Radiant with hand cannons when you have this perk taken off, like you have, say, you know, Unstoppable Bow instead, and then you have a bow in this slot. You could use these as your anti-barrier. I wouldn't recommend it because generally barrier champions like to kick further away from you. They don't like to get close to you. And hand cannons do have damage fall off once you reach a decent distance. So personally, that's why I think a pulse rifle with Radiant or a bow with Radiant would be better. But again, you can sort of customize this loadout to sort of suit you. The core of this build is found in, you know, the fact that you can use Radiant for anti-barrier, and you can also accommodate using an exotic rocket launcher like Dragon's Breath to deal with barrier champions or any champions, and Golden Gun can also deal with champions. But speaking of Golden Gun, let's get into the build here. So you also have a little bit of freedom here if you have different preferences. Well, first off, obviously, we're running a Golden Gun build, so Golden Gun Marksman. We have Gambler's Dodge. I like triple jump, but obviously run whatever jump you're most comfortable with. Weighted Throwing Knife is pretty important here, because Weighted Throwing Knife is going to is how we're going to weaken targets. This also allows us to cause ignitions. When we fire our Dragon's Breath at a target, we can throw a weighted throwing knife at that same target to weaken them, and then also pop off an immediate ignition from Dragon's Breath, which is extremely powerful. It is a very, very potent combo because that will refund us fuel for the Dragon's Breath. So, highly recommend weighted throwing knife. But again, if you're a trick knife, if you're a knife trick user and you're just more comfortable with it, by all means. But I personally find weighted throwing knife is the way to go. You can also recover your weighted throwing knife with Gambler's Dodge if you ever miss it or lose it for whatever reason, like you don't kill a target with it and you need to get it back. Gambler's Dodge is your fallback. Our way to heal and recover, we have our healing grenade here, and we can use this to just basically heal on need or heal our party, and just very, very great for any situation. We'll go to our aspects next. I have On Your Mark here, which this is just, a bunch of good stats. You also will proc this with the standard gameplay loop that you have going, Precision Final Blows, and you also provide these stats to your allies, so what's not to like about On Your Mark? You can switch to Gunpowder Gamble, but you're going to have to sacrifice a fragment slot. And I'll point out the fragment slot that I would recommend if you would prefer to use Gunpowder Gamble. Obviously, next we have Knock 'em Down, where the main component of this is the secondary component, where while Radiant, final blows with your equipped throwing knife fully refund your melee damage. So you can chuck a throwing knife at a red bar enemy that starts to run at you. Odds are it's going to kill them. Not always, but odds are it's going to, especially if you land a precision hit, it is going to kill them. And that will allow you, that'll just refund your throwing knife. Now, the reason that this will always work is because we are using Ember of Torches. Ember of Torches is just one of the best solar fragments in the game. So we'll get Radiant when we use our throwing knife, if we don't already have it from Flint Striker. The reason I choose to do this is because it sort of gives you more options to get yourself Radiant. Like, if you get into a scenario where you're like, oh crap, I can't land a precision hit everywhere, everything's dying, stuff's going on, my party members are killing everything on a high-level Master Loft Sector, just chuck a knife at something big, at a big enemy. You'll get yourself and any nearby allies Radiant. Just a really, really good option. And that's also in those higher level difficulties. That's why, when you're in group play, knife trick might be the play, because it's easier to land. Moving on to the other fragments, we have Ember of Singeing. Your class ability regenerates faster when you scorch targets. We have a lot of stuff that's going to be scorching targets. In addition to our knife and our incandescence from our bow when we kill stuff. Dragon's Breath, which scorches stuff. And then on top of that, we have an artifact perk, which is while we're Radiant, causing solar weapon damage, applies Scorch to unscorched combatants. This will, for Dragon's Breath in particular, this is some mean stuff, because even if you haven't already hit a target with Scorch, and you fire Dragon's Breath at them while you're Radiant, the initial hit's going to scorch them, then they're also going to get more Scorch stacks from once it starts chucking out fuel everywhere. It's just, that's great. We will also briefly talk about Raise the Precision, which, again, a lot of our build is focused around precision. This is essentially adding insult to injury when you precision kill an enemy with a Radiant solar weapon, namely our bow. So our bow is not only going to cause incandescence on their immediate death, their corpse is then going to ignite and blow up. So if there's any enemies remaining in the vicinity that have been scorched and sort of staggered, then the ignition goes off and wipes out any weaker enemies and does a chunk of damage to anything bigger, which is just great. And this also, again, I'm going to mention a fragment slot you can change to further this sort of spreading scorch loop if you're in a scenario where there's a lot of enemies and you're just looking to cause tons of chain reaction explosions. But moving on for the moment, we have Ember of Ephirion, which is great because we can extend Radiant and Restoration just by getting final blows with solar weapons or abilities. So we don't necessarily need to keep up those precision hits all the time. If we miss, we have some forgiveness here. of refreshing our Radiant and also stacking up a restoration duration. So, Ember of Ephirion, a really, really good fragment. Again, another one of the best fragments to have on Solar. Next up, we have Ember of Ashes. You apply more Scorch stacks to targets. So this is what I have opted for, mainly for Dragon's Breath. Actually, almost purely for Dragon's Breath, because it'll make Dragon's Breath apply more Scorch stacks, leading to more ignitions. Meaning it is just better at doing its job of just massacring champions, bosses, and groups of enemies alike with tons of ignitions. It also will refund its fuel more immediately, allowing for quicker use when you fire it into a group of enemies. Another option you can choose to do is Ember of Char. Your Scorch Ignitions apply Scorch to affected targets. This will also get you a little bit of extra discipline for regenerating your Healing Grenade. So this is an option for those of you who are just you like Char better than Ashes. I personally find in my situations, I've liked Ashes better than Char. But feel free, based on your preferences and, your gameplay style, to experiment around. Lastly, we've got Ember of Searing, which is defeating Scorched targets, grants melee energy, and creates a Fire Spirit. And then Fire Spirits give us back grenade energy, which will allow us to have our Healing Grenade more often than not when we really, really need it most. So this is just great. And you also get melee energy back, so on that rare occasion where, Gambler's Dodge hasn't, you've used your knife a couple times, you haven't killed anything with it, Gambler's Dodge is, still cooling down, this can get you some melee energy back. So again, to speak of On Your Mark and switching it for Gunpowder Gamble, really, Searing and Ashes are the two that are sort of up to you. You can, if you find you want to dump Searing and you don't need that extra recovery and you don't really feel the melee energy is doing a lot for you, the fire sprites from it you feel you're not picking them up often enough, or you're not, you'll see them pretty often, but you feel like you're not benefiting from the grenade regen from the fire sprites, you can swap these around, get Gunpowder Gamble on, and then maybe you can put Char on, so that your Gunpowder Gamble is spreading Scorch when you shoot it and it's causing its ignitions. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of there being some freedom in this build for the way you want to play this. Next off, we're going to go to the mods and the gear. So first off, something I just want to mention is Wished into Being. While your super is nearly fully charged, your ability Final Blows spawn orbs of power. Wearing Season of the Witch armor decreases super amount threshold. If you do not have access to Artifice armor, like you haven't gotten into dungeons or high endgame content, I would fully recommend at very least changing your mark to the current season's mark, because not only are you going to get some more reputation with Riven, it will contribute to this artifact trait here, which is great because you'll just get some more orbs of power. With that said, moving on to the fragments, for mods, we are running Time Dilation. We're running a Time Dilation Surge font setup. So on our Celestial Nighthawk here on our helmet, I have Font of Wisdom for Intellect while I have Armor Charges, which is, nice 30 Intellect. So as you can see, based on my Intellect down there, I'm going to reach the 100 threshold of Intellect. I have Harmonic Siphon to get Orbs of Power when I get rapid solar weapon kills, which you will get a lot of. Hands-on, just for some more super energy whenever you land that throwing knife. Another really good option here, actually, surprisingly, and we'll get to why it's actually a pretty good option, Heavy Ammo Finder. Even though it takes a very long time to get that guaranteed brick, it will just sort of help, even if it's only one every, couple encounters. Because that brick, instead of giving us one rocket, is going to give us multiple rockets, guaranteed. Because we are running a Harmonic Scavenger. So whenever we pick up special or heavy weapon ammo, we generate additional ammo. So for example, we pick up a brick, it has 2 rockets in it. For a Dragon's Breath, it'll have 3 instead. This just helps us keep well stocked for champions in general. And I am a huge scavenger stan now. I didn't use them before this season, but ever since I've started using them, I don't think I would go back. If I'm using a rocket, I'm pretty sure I'm going to be using a scavenger. But back on up, then let's go to our gloves next. So we have a heavy-handed, so whenever we kill something with our knives, we'll get an orb of power, which can further feed into our armor charges, which is always nice. Impact induction, causing damage with a powered melee, reduces your grenade cooldown, so if we damage something with our throwing knife, we will then get our grenade will start to cool down more, which is nice, to get our healing grenade back. We have font of focus, so again, when we have our armor charges, we get an extra 30 discipline, which makes our grenades just start to recharge faster. On the chest, this is whatever, dependent entirely on what activity you're running. Generally, a pretty safe bet is to run one of each resistance, but again, depending on what types of enemies you're going up against, or if there's going to be a lot of snipers, for example, and they're like those Vandal snipers, so you're like, okay, I want arc resistance and I want sniper damage resistance. But keep in mind for running things like sniper damage and melee damage resistance, these are based off range, not actually based on like whether something, uses an ability that's classified as melee. So if an enemy shoots you from point blank, melee damage resistance will enact. But again, I feel like you're best off with just using an array of elemental damage resistances based on the experiences that I've had. Whether you stack 3 of one to really negate a threat or whatever you're going up against, or you spread them around. Legs next up. Obviously, we already went over the scavenger, which is a big thing. We have our surge here, which is our solar weapon surge, so for our bow and our dragon's breath. The nice thing is also we have an artifact trait. Blast radius, rapid final blows with rocket launchers and grenade launchers grant armor charge. So this works with Dragon's Breath, and then it'll mean that we can just get an armor charge back from our consumption of Ardent Ordnance there. Or, if we didn't have any, because, we just haven't been picking up Orbs of Power or getting armor charges, we can kickstart our Solar Weapon Surge in there, which is nice. We have recuperation, so whenever we pick up an orb of power, we get a little bit of health. Originally, I actually did have innervation on here, but then I realized innervation would just be giving me a small amount of energy to get my healing grenade back. So why not just cut out the middleman and just get some straight healing whenever I pick up an orb? So that was our choice there. Next off the mark, obviously we have time dilation. We then have powerful attraction, so whenever we dodge, we pick up all the nearby orbs. And bomber, so whenever we dodge, we'll get some energy back for our cure grenade to get us restoration. And that's more or less it. I hope you guys enjoyed the gameplay. I hope this is helpful for you. I hope you can find out some loadouts that work for you to help you deal with the champions. But I definitely would recommend Dragon's Breath and Celestial Nighthawk if you're on a hunter and you're ever struggling with champions. These are just 2 tools you can use to make dealing with champions easier more frequently as well. Like, they'll be easier to deal with more of the time, more often than they are not. So again, hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time. Peace out.